We're discussing supply chains today, and the direct-to-consumer opportunity, and some of the challenges that companies are facing. Some folks are having a drop in demand, and others are having an increase in demand. And both of those have attendant issues that are interesting to marketing and comms folks, but just to companies in general. And we're going to be getting into some of those issues today. We have probably one of the saints of mankind with us. We have Jackson from Clorox. He's the VP and GM of direct-to-consumer for Clorox, thrust into the limelight now with everything that we've been experiencing with coronavirus. We have our host, Kevin King, who we've introduced him many times. He was the global chair for Edelman Digital for a long time. He's a senior advisor at Low Earth Orbit, and he is now the acting chief global digital officer at Dole, and also helping companies like Facebook and others. I'll let him get into that a little bit more in a moment. And then we have Joe Toomey, who is with NMS Consulting, our partner, and the folks making this series happen, and or especially this one, and they usually focus on other matters, like regional ones, and M&A. So we've got those videos that you've seen before. But he is a supply chain expert, Joe is, and he spent time with IBM and Big Four and a variety of other consulting groups focused in particular on supply chains and how to handle them. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Cool. So I think it'd be good just to hear, Joanne, I appreciate the introductions for you, for all of us, but it would be good for, I think, just all of us to give a quick introduction in the business that we're in and some of the challenges that we're facing. So Joseph, I'll start with you. Just give a little bit about your background and some of the things you're dealing with right now.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I've been a supply chain consultant for 25 years or so. I came out of industry. I was in the transportation industry as a finance professional. That's my background. Since joining consultants, have worked with a lot of marquee consultants all over the world, helping them streamline supply chain, particularly in the area of distribution and logistics. I think of myself more as a global logistics strategist. The last client I was working with was setting up a fleet distribution operation in the fast food space. They're taking over operations from an existing vendor of fleet operations. That's a typical kind of work assignment for me. I've also done lots of work in network rationalization, in carrier strategic sourcing, a whole bunch of other in global trade management, and a whole bunch of allied areas. My focus has primarily been on below the line, below the top line, taking cost out of the total cost structure.
Kevin?
Kevin,
you were on
Sorry,
mute.
Jackson, you would do a quick introduction as well?
There was like an 80% chance I read your lips. I'm pretty sure that's what you said, but I didn't want to assume and start going into it. So thank you for confirming. I'm Jackson. I'm the VP and General Manager of Direct to Consumer for Clorox. I've been in the role for a little over a year, 2 months, I think. So obviously a lot going on in our world. You know, my job and my focus is obviously as General Manager to own and scale and profitably grow P&L as it relates to all the pure play D2C brands we have, which is just a few. But then probably as importantly, scale direct-to-consumer for Clorox across the whole organization and what that means, the short-term and long-term, from a revenue, data, learning standpoint. So there's a lot there that incorporates talent, technology, and still P&L management, but also in service to other GMs as well from our business unit perspective. Before Clorox, I was a CMO of a startup called Boxed in New York, e-commerce, CPG, was there for about 2.5 years. And then before that, I ran digital at Chipotle. all things marketing, digital marketing, and working very closely with the e-commerce team as well when we launched the app and then order fulfillment in store and eventually delivery. And then before that, 15 years of agency between Portland and Seattle and New York across several different kinds of agencies supporting mostly Fortune 500 brands, NASCAR, Allstate, Jordan Brand, Diageo, P&G, T-Mobile, and so forth. Good to be here.
Cool. No, great to have you. Both of you. And then, I guess, Jackson, I'll just open up for you. I mean, the obvious question I think is everybody's on everyone's mind is just the supply chain issue around cleaning supplies right now. But I think more importantly, I mean, I think we're all familiar with, Joseph, you can talk some of the supply chain challenges and how the ripple effect happens. But I think from Jackson, your perspective, beyond the supply chain, how has your overall marketing plan shifted the last sort of 3 or 4 months? I mean, obviously, very traditional brand, targeting, kind of above the line, probably doing a lot of television, probably a lot of retail work. How have you seen your business change in the last couple months as a result of everything that's happening right now?
Yeah, and for everyone watching, I asked Kevin, like, please don't put me on the spot and ask me about Clorox supply chain issues, because obviously I can't speak to it. So he's been really great. I know you guys are probably wondering about it.
Where can I get Clorox wipe?
Exactly. So I appreciate Kevin the subtle nod. That was perfect. Thank you. And just everyone who's watching knows, like, our CEO is actually out there talking about this in the last few days. So if you are curious about that, you can Google it. He was on Mad Money. He's been on Yahoo talking about kind of how we're addressing it. So he's definitely better position to talk about it than I am. And I'd like to have a job after this meeting. But yeah, to your larger point, I think, Kevin, it's also shifted how we all think, and all of us on this call and other people, right, in our similar industries, in terms of what the consumer behavior is. And clearly, we all knew e-commerce was upon us, right? Amazon clearly setting the stage, but we saw that happening throughout the world, especially in the U.S. The question was, at what rate, what adoption, in particular as it relates to your world, Kevin, my world, CPG, grocery. We knew the barriers to e-commerce, whether it was pickup or even just getting delivered to your door. Either way, it was, a lot of it was around the produce, the quality of produce, touching and feeling that, the fruit and vegetables. Frozen was also an issue, the costs around that. So the adoption wasn't there. The awareness probably wasn't there at scale outside of the coast, especially. Now, clearly, we're seeing a huge shift across the board, right, in terms of how people are going to shop. And that's made, I think, all of us included, think about what does e-commerce look like? How do we accelerate? How do we partner with our retailers for omni-channel as people think about less store visits and getting more upfront versus like 5 visits a week to various stores, drugstores, and grocery? I go one time over 2 weeks. How much is delivered to me and how much is picked up so I can limit how much interaction I have with other people? So I think all that's accelerated. And luckily, when I was hired, one of the first things I did was bring on great talent better than me, to build a custom tech stack so we can support direct-to-consumer and all future direct-to-consumer initiatives. So we are now in the process of scaling that out to build out and support all the Clorox brands. But with that comes obviously a lot of intricacies with integration with the back of the house, fulfillment, supply chain, last mile, which we already have at small scale. But also working closely with our e-commerce team to get the learnings, what they're seeing from the retailers on omnichannel, because I've always thought omnichannel was the future, not pure play D2C, not pure play retail. I've never thought physical was going anywhere, and I still don't think it is. The footprint of those physical stores might come down. You might see less stores. The whole experience is going to change, but it's always going to be there, in my opinion. So that is, I think, what we're adapting to, and I think many others are. We just happen to be a little bit ahead of the game, I think, on the D2C side, and now continuing to scale that and learn from e-commerce and learn from our sales folks and physical retailers what we can do to optimize. And a lot of that, to be honest, is talent. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of talent out there looking for jobs, really, really, really good e-commerce D2C talent. So we've also tried to figure out how can we play a small role in helping those people who need jobs and who are really, really good at what they do and just, came upon bad luck like many people have right now.
Yeah. And how closely as a marketer, how closely are you tied into your product availability side? So how are you balancing your marketing initiatives with the product availability side?
Great question. So, the one of the reasons I took this role was to shift from that pure marketing landscape and perspective I had to a broader GM role. So while I definitely gravitate towards, much to chagrin of my head of creative and head of growth, I gravitate towards the marketing role sometimes. It has forced me to also understand the full supply chain operations, R&D, finance, HR, of course, technology, and so forth. So Amazon sales have spiked for us. We sell products on Amazon. As you can imagine, we have a lot of immunity products. People want immunity products. People are thinking about their sleep and stress. We have sleep and stress products, as you can imagine, that are top of mind for everyone. We have focus products, all natural ingredients. So we've seen a huge shift in mentality of people thinking about how do I need to invest in my health a little bit differently, even beyond immunity. And I think that will continue to shift even in a recession where it's about value and what are the things that are most important to me and my family versus the things that maybe aren't as necessary in my life right now and maybe aren't as valuable. You don't provide the same value for the cost I'm putting out there. So for us, what that meant was we saw a huge spike in interest around certain categories, and we had to adapt quickly with our supply chain, with our teams to say, okay, if we're going to overinvest in certain areas, where's it going to be? And let's make sure that we have a plan of attack for, post-COVID, post-quarantine, because this is a moment in time. So, you have to balance that need out. Like, am I going to buy a lot of inventory that I might be stuck with in 6 months that, now I have to figure out what to do. So that's the game we play. And it's a little bit of the learning that I've enjoyed, but that's something that we're constantly talking about. And sometimes you have to make a strategic investment. Like, you know what, this is going to be a longer term thought process for us. Health and wellness, we think, will be a longer term perspective for a lot of people in fall, again, in winter. I don't think this is going away even in a recession. So I think for us, it's like, this is a smart strategic bet for us to ensure that we have products that meet consumer needs based on how it's shifting right now.
Got it. And then Joseph, I'm curious to see, obviously Jackson's with Clorox, very much a retail brand. I've been working with Dole, obviously very much a grocery brand. Only about 2% of our sales leading into this were through the e-commerce channel. Major disruption in kind of the supply chain, how we're handling things. I'm just curious, across other brands and other companies, how are you seeing things change right now? What's happening right now?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked exactly that question because I brought along some slides. I'm not sure if we can get them up. Julian, is that possible? You could just pivot right to slide number 4. I'm kind of an evidence-based consultant. That is to say, I don't usually talk from notional concepts, but zero right in on where the evidence resides. And what we're seeing right now in the supply chain, if you could just muscle all the way down to slide number 4, one more. And so here is a survey that the American Trucking Research Institute published just a couple of days ago. And there's been some pretty profound changes. This is a survey of what's happening with trucking. And clearly, there's been a spike towards local delivery, whereas prior to the pandemic, in the fewer than 100-mile distance segment, only 7.8% of the miles were being accommodated, or sorry, not miles, but departures or moves were residing in that segment. Suddenly that has more than doubled. So we're seeing an immediate and big shift, a sizable shift in freight that and traffic that moved away from longer haul, and now a lot of this movement is in short haul, local delivery. We're seeing the UPS and the FedEx truck 3 or 4 times a day in my neighborhood. A lot more parcels. Everybody up and down the street is getting parcels. I can tell you from my own experience that we're ordering much more online than we did before. To supplement, 2 reasons for that. Number one, we don't want to go interact with too many people inside of a store right now. And the other reason is when we go there, a lot of the things are simply not available, and they can be obtained at Walmart.com and other retailers. So that's caused our shift in our behavior, as well as everybody else, from looking out the front door. The next slide, if you can. And I'll just really quickly, since 1992, this online segment has grown nearly 7 times faster than the traditional retail segment. Everybody knows that. but the next slide will show you what impact that's had in the supply chain, is that from the standpoint of, historically, transportation and warehousing employment pretty much went hand in hand in terms of the scale. As transportation employment increased by a factor of 50%, warehousing increased by the same factor, because more or less the same processes were being undertaken, only at greater scale. But in 2002, a sudden shift occurred with a migration to more digital commerce that was caused, and that resulted in much more warehouse activity because it's a much more labor-intensive activity. So you got this decoupling in that long-standing relationship, and that factor happens to be the exact 7x factor that we saw in terms of the dollar of sales. So dollars of sales and activity followed right along in the same relative percentage. And I suspect that what you're going to see is now an inflection point where we'll see even higher degrees than we had seen. These relationships had been moving at a kind of a pace that was fairly steady state. I think we're going to see a much more profound change, and so you'll see a spike up in these relationships starting now, that I think people are going to realize they can get much more of what they consume delivered to their door, and they've seen the convenience and they've seen the value in that, and you're going to see a lot more of that. Just a shift to the next slide. There's not a lot of these, so fortunately, the problem obviously is that when you add a lot more warehouse people relative to transportation people, it's pulled down the wage rates in the overall supers category, in what's called the super segment that is tracked by Bureau of Labor Standards. So, it was surprising to me, but warehouse wages for warehouse workers have been flat for 28 months now. So that's nearly 2.5 years where warehouse employees have not seen any boost in their weekly wages. I think the last slide we'll probably take a look at, two more. This one just says, I'm sorry, the previous one is sort of a validation on that. It just said, in the last 6 or 8 weeks, this company called Geotab, if you can back up just one, they went and looked at where are vehicles actually occurring, where are they going, and we see a spike up in the warehouse. It was actually one just before this, Julian, not that it much matters, but there's all of the segments are flat or down, industrial, commercial, and so on, grocery stores. Grocery stores holding up pretty well, about 90% of prior, activity prior to the quarantine and the pandemic, but a huge spike up in departures out of warehouses. So this is confirming this shift to the direct-to-consumer. The last piece of intelligence here, this is kind of what's happening with vehicles. And we're seeing a large spike in medium and light duty vehicles. Those are the vehicle types that are involved in delivery primarily to consumers. So right now, business is real good in the direct-to-consumer space or direct-to-customer space, and that's being borne out in the data. Usually the data lags by quite a few months, and it's very difficult to get up to the minute kind of information like this. But we are very fortunate to be able to find some information to back up what our hypothesis was, that we're actually seeing vehicle activity, we're actually seeing distance-related activity, actually seeing departure type activity that backs up the supposition that this DTC space is set for pretty significant growth and got this spike that came at the expense of traditional retailers.
It's all really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's it. I'll just hand off now.
Okay. All right. Kevin?
Yeah, no. So, Jackson, I mean, I guess my question for you is like, obviously, we're seeing massive. This is super interesting context. Seeing massive marketing shift. Obviously, you had campaigns going for Clorox that were probably designed around, I don't know. I mean, you tell me, purpose, or, it's obviously had to flex and change very quickly based on kind of the reality situations. Can you talk a little bit about how you've had to adjust your marketing strategy based on the reality versus what you were doing before?
Yeah. So I would say, I've been at smaller companies and mid-sized companies, and, a lot of pros and cons. One of the biggest benefits of being in a company like Clorox that's so well run is communication, so consistent. And Kevin, I'm sure you see this at Dole from the top, very consistent, clear communication, expectations were set. And one of the biggest things was focus. This is going to be a crazy time for us, inevitably, between the way people are working, the way consumers are shopping, the various phases of this going into a recession. So focus is critical, and everything else that might have been a priority before is no longer a priority. People are going to have kids in their laps and crazy lives to manage. So focus on things that matter the most. So that was the first thing we did across the board, including marketing. Focus our spend, focus our effort, focus all resources around the things that are the most important now for the shorter term. And there are certain products, as I mentioned, for us on the wellness side, especially, immunity and sleep and rest are some of the biggest ones. So that was the first thing. Secondly, I think it was also being sensitive to a potential recession, or, you could argue the recession's upon us right now. And so value is critical, not making sure nothing we had was really too premium to begin with, but making sure that we're communicating on the value of the product versus just like core product benefits, which is a little bit of a twist, right? And like, what is the value of extra sleep? What is the value of extra rest, peace of mind around your health? That's a little different than talking about an ingredient specific story or talking about, an origin story. I would say thirdly, I've also worked with my team and challenged my team to think about frequency. I'm also very sensitive to how many messages we go out there when I see my feed full of people looking for jobs. It's a sad time right now from that perspective. So while it's more on LinkedIn, I see it on Facebook, I even see it on Instagram. It's a ripple effect, right? So, not that we can stop doing a business, right? Everyone knows that we still have to operate our businesses, right? If anything, more now than ever, but we can still be sensitive. We can still be ethical. For instance, one of our brands, we're donating products to healthcare workers. We didn't really promote it that much because I didn't feel like that was the right thing to do. And I think my whole team agreed, like, we don't want to promote this as a thing. It's just like, hey, if you're a customer objective, just know that we're donating products for free for people who need it the most, up to a certain limit that we could afford, because it's a smaller brand that, it just launched a few months ago, all the way down to like just being thoughtful with the messages we put out there and being sensitive to everything that people are going through. So it was a combination of being thoughtful and ethical. Here's a great example. We actually didn't send an email out when everyone else was sending emails out when that first stage happened of quarantine, and now the second
Yep.
stage. Not that those emails weren't great. They actually weren't. So certain cases, especially delivery for food and delivery companies, it made a lot of sense. But I don't know about you guys. I was inundated for those first 72 hours of email after email from brands. And some of these brands, I'm like, why are you emailing me about this? I'm not going to talk to you for another year. Like my car company that, I have a leased car from, like, it wasn't about a relief if you need it from a lease. It was like, hey, if you want to get another car, 0% APR finance. I'm like, really? That's the message you're sending out now? So contactless delivery, emails from the founders make sense. But I had 50 or 60. So we had a huge Slack exchange with our team about should we do this and what the pros and cons were. It was really good. And we decided not to, because we're like, well, it's going to be crowded. It feels like it's saturated. And what are we going to say? Like, while we are an important category, we're not essential. And right now people need to be hearing from the essential brand. So in a weird way, part of our strategy was like, let's not market when we don't have to. Let's be smart. Let's like focus on the products. Let's not send a message because everyone else is sending it out. And if we have a reason to talk about maybe contactless delivery or maybe immunity products, and we'll do that. But trying to find that balance of ethics and what's the right thing in your gut, right? So the data, we're big on data. We're also really, really big on the heart and science and the instinct. And then does this feel right? That would I feel good my parents getting this email, one of the 30 others, and my parents maybe being the highest risk of the audience to get affected by COVID, not knowing, not being particularly savvy, not knowing what's real and what's not, what to click on, what to buy. So for all those reasons, we didn't want to aggressively participate in those communications. So that's one example of something that we thought about a little differently.
Yeah. And Joseph, who do you think are some of the big winners and losers right now? Who do you think are like, do you think Amazon's a winner? Do you think, like, what are the distribution channels do you think are going to be the winners and the losers right now?
Yeah, well, to my terrible regret, Amazon is a big winner. I don't use Amazon. I have a great deal of animosity toward them, particularly because in my opinion, they're not a fair player. I mean, the last thing, if you're entering in this space, you would want to put your information on Amazon, because 5 or 6 months from now, after they've collected all your customer data, they're going to launch a parallel product under their private label and steal market share. Now, I know that they're being investigated by that, and I know that they claim they don't do that, but unfortunately, I believe they do. And because of these unethical practices and for some other reasons, I've shifted all my online buying to Walmart.com. There's a cultural issue there as well. I find Walmart suits my mentality a little bit better. Although I don't think of myself as the traditional Walmart shopper, I much prefer, it's like William Buckley once said, he'd much prefer to be ruled by the first 100 names in the Boston phone book than the Harvard faculty. So, that's kind of the corollary of that with me. I find cultural affinity walking into a Walmart than I do dealing with the, sort of the elite brands. The big losers, obviously, the biggest losers are in the travel space right now. Jackson was saying all the emails that he got. Well, of course, we all got them. But I could understand why the hotel was telling me, here's what the steps were taken to make the hotel, free from infection when you walk in the door. Here are the steps the rental car company is taking to make the car safe when you get into it, overcome your anxiety. Same way with the airline seat, and same way with, the restaurant that you typically patronize. So restaurants happen to be closed right now, but the food on carryout, they want to make sure that you believe they're serving up a product that has integrity. These are the companies that are suffering the worst. I mean, basically, the hotel, the airline, rental car industries, they've basically shuttered for now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting on what Jackson was saying before on all the emails. I think we discussed in some of the earlier calls, Joy, and you'll probably remember, I really appreciated Geico's message. I couldn't name who the CEO was, but, without me asking, they reduced my car insurance rate by 15%, which was actually of value to me. It was like, I read that and I was like, oh, wow, they reduced my rates. I didn't even ask. I didn't have to do anything. It's just my rates came down. All these other brands were sort of sending out like we're here for you. We're all in this together. We're supportive. And it's like, I don't really need that right now from a brand. I get that from my friends and family. When Geico sends me that they're knocking 50% off my insurance because less cars are on the road, like that's a value. But many of the other messages were just these generic kind of "we're here for you" messages, and I think it got lost in the mix.
Yeah, it's probably, we're knocking 15% off of your rate because we're experiencing 30% decline in claims.
Yeah, but it was still a good message. It's still less money for me.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree with you. It was a good message.
Yeah.
Also, what you said about Amazon, that came up on the call with Jackson and Kevin a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, I mean, I am curious to hear Jackson. I mean, obviously we talked about that earlier, and I don't know how much you can go into that, but Amazon's kind of like the it's the devil if you do, devil if you don't, right? Like you're kind of dependent on them at this moment in time, but you also realize that it's a long-term, maybe not the best strategic approach. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, Amazon is a partner of ours, right? So we sell our products on there, and you're right. And they're having traffic that they've never seen before, and maybe never will, right? Even compared to Prime Day and so forth, for obvious reasons. So clearly, it's a big part of our mix. But listen, they're the biggest, but they're not the only ones who are able to leverage data in a very smart way to inform decisions they're going to make around products and acquisitions and ad spend. And you take that risk. Now, retailers have always done this, right? Private brand has been around for 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, I don't know. The difference, however, though, is, retailers generally didn't know their consumer on an individual level. They didn't know Joseph, Kevin, and Julian Jackson. They knew macro data, and they knew kind of demographics and all the other stuff that we all knew, but they didn't know who they were, whereas, Amazon and any digital commerce player does. So, you take the good with the bad. I think the biggest challenge there is like, hey, I mean, and if I was, to be quite honest, if I was Bezos, if I was Amazon, I would think about a similar strategy. Like, how do I get smart and creative with the data I have and the things I can utilize to better inform my business decisions and things that I'm going to invest in. And clearly with their Whole Foods acquisition, there's a lot of opportunity for them to do that. So it's something, the private brand trend is not going away. And I saw it at Box, right? So I'll tell you, from my Box data point I can speak to is we had a private brand, and it was a good part of our business and did really well. And the first thing, this is like 3 or 4 years ago, right? The first thing that people bought and replaced the name brands with were paper products, home essentials, right? It was paper plates, it was paper spoons, it was toilet paper, paper towels, right? Generally, you're seeing a premium placed on a bigger name brand. They were coming to us and other brands because it was cheaper, and it did the same thing. And I think you'll continue to see that across the board, but that was definitely the first category to go. Now, other categories, definitely, like an Oreo cookie is an Oreo cookie, no question about it. But I know plenty of people who also buy the name brand generic Oreo version cookie, and they're happy with it. So as you get into more of those, beloved brands, as you get into more of those medium consideration brands, it might be a little bit longer, but there's no question that Amazon leading the pack, but everyone who has that access to that data as a retailer, especially digital, is going to position themselves to take advantage of that. And I would expect them to.
Yep, exactly. I mean, every client I've ever worked with, there's been what I call the bloody borders of competition. Doesn't matter what relationship it is, even if it's a pure partnership relationship, once you shake hands and you set what you think are the boundaries of our partnership, suddenly there's encroachment in either direction as one party tries to encroach on that boundary to push the boundary of competition further into their advantage. So it's a sort of a back and forth thing. It's obviously a very dynamic boundary.
And I would add two things to that, Joseph. We haven't talked about this. One, and as we get into recession, even more so, right? If I can spend 30% less on a thing that basically does the same thing as the other thing, I'm going to do that. And if I have a family of 7, I'm definitely going to do that. So it's no brainer, right? It's going to happen. Kirkland is a great example of that. It's going to happen across the board in digital. What's also interesting too is similar to what Amazon did to Toys R Us, but in a different way. You're going to see the same thing happen. Look at all these restaurants going to Grubhub and Caviar and Instacart and DoorDash, or not Instacart, DoorDash and Postmates. They have to, right? It's obvious. Some of them have invested, like Chipotle, in their own delivery and e-commerce and pickup. Those who haven't, it's the same story, man. Like coming out of this, and these guys have already thought about it. They own the customer. They own the data. So what happens when I'm servicing Wendy's, I'm servicing Burger King, and this scales to any kind of level of restaurant, QSR, fast food to high end, and you stop paying me, or you don't give in on deals on that rev split that we have. Great. I know the customer that buys your Wendy's burger is probably going to also buy the Burger King burger, for the most part. I'm just going to go ahead and shift this over to them and say, hey, Burger King, do you want to play ball? And that's just going to win my customer. Instacart's the same thing with grocery stores. So like to me, if I was running a QSR or a restaurant or any of those businesses, the first thing I would be doing is, yes, there's a means to an end right now. You need these partners and they make a lot of sense. But the first thing I'd be doing, would have done this 2 years ago, is investing in my own e-commerce pickup and delivery solution to make sure that I own my customer data as much as I can while not ignoring that solution. But Instacart's going to do it to grocery stores, and for sure the food delivery companies will do it to restaurants, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a matter of survival.
Yeah, and it's also product innovation, or just business innovation in general. I mean, Jackson, I'd be curious here from your standpoint. I mean, one of the, I'll speak on Dole really quickly is, product innovation wise, e-commerce wasn't a heavy focus. It's suddenly a heavy focus right now. Are you starting to shift your product innovation, your product innovation group to kind of deal with what's happening, or is that not caught up quite yet?
Yeah, I mean, it depends which group. Obviously my group is so D2C specific. We're already there. But other groups, yeah, we're working closely with them to figure out what are the kinds of SKUs that we can move faster in e-commerce. What are things we can test on e-commerce and D2C? I think that's what you're asking. Now, if you're asking, are people going to buy at scale Glad trash bags, D2C only versus Walmart versus Amazon? I don't think anytime soon, right? I mean, you're still going to go buy that with your 20 other things or whatever grocery store experience, online or offline, right? No brainer. However, there's other products we have that would maybe scale much, much faster, right? Burt's Bees is one of our brands that has like over 200 SKUs, I think. And everyone knows Burt's Bees for lip balm, but they actually have a lot of products, baby, health, lotions. And that's one where you could definitely see, they already have D2C up and running. But you could totally see that scaling, and as it has with Amazon. You could also see, as we think about broader scale, like what is a portfolio play? What are all those opportunities? So that's how we think about it long term. What's our strategy with what are the products that people are likely to buy from a brand direct? And then what are the products that, even if they buy direct, still make more sense in a full cart grocery experience? And that's how we think about it. At least I have.
We've got some fascinating people who are in the audience here. Folks, head over to Slack and ask some questions, because I know that there are a few of you who would be amazing. So get on your fingers and toes. Let's see this. Keep going, guys.
Stump the doors.
Jackson, let me ask you a question. Your sales are probably up. Business is doing well, recognizing there's probably a lot of hoarding going on. You've got to like look at the long-term kind of impact, but are you still spending money on paid media, or are you putting on hold right now?
We are spending. Yep, we are spending, and actually our CEO talked about the incremental spend as well publicly. But my group, we are also spending in D2C. You know, what I've seen actually is CPMs have gone down. CPMs have gone down almost across the board on Facebook and Instagram, because think about some of the biggest purchasers of that media. They are no longer spending. So you have startups that are now struggling, who spent a lot on digital media performance, and you're seeing the list of startups that have had layoffs. So clearly marketing spend had to go down. You're not buying luggage. You're not buying certain things related to travel and hospitality, for instance. We're also seeing like big auto, real estate, other industries that generally will spend a lot. Restaurants spending significantly less. So we've seen upwards of 30% decrease in CPMs across Facebook and Instagram. And even we've started to look into TV. TV, same thing. I mean, auto has dominated TV. I haven't seen an auto ad in days. I don't know about you guys. I have the TV on the background, CNBC all the time. And it makes sense, right? Why would they right now? So I think we're starting to see opportunities there to actually invest a little bit more based on that.
I was laughing at, I live in Los Angeles. I was laughing that they announced today that they were going to lift they were going to allow auto dealerships to do curbside pickup or curbside sales. I'm like, how does that work with a car? Like,
yeah, that seems like an oxymoron. That sounds like that sounds like auto theft. I don't know. That sounds like
I'm just gonna pull up the Mercedes dealership and.
Well, to be honest with you, when you think about it, you can go online and configure your dream car, and
you can.
You spec out the drivetrain and the electronic suite that you want, and the engine type and the color and all the other appointments that you need. And so what is the reason why you can't just go online, do that, and have somebody just tow it to your front door? You never see the dealer. You just complete all the paperwork online. The only thing they have to do is check to see if you're sober when you receive it. And they throw you the keys from 10 feet away in a disinfected bag. So
I think Fiona's got a question, but she is heading over to Slack now. Aparna asked a question. What are the augmented reality and extended reality examples that have you the most excited? Is that something that you're exploring right now, Jackson and Kevin, or Joe? You look ready for some VR, Joe.
I'll take a pass on augmented and extended reality for now and listen to what others have to say.
What do you think, Jackson and Kevin?
Kevin, I gotta imagine you've thought about this a lot.
I don't have an answer for it. I mean, honestly, you're kind of getting into the innovation message there, and I got to be honest, with everything that's going on, we're kind of focusing on the basics right now, on trying to get product into the stores, trying to get basic messaging out. I don't want to say that innovation has been backburnered, but it's pretty hard to innovate when you're just trying to kind of deal with the business reality that's going on right now. So I do think that's a struggle that, like, I can't speak to AR specifically and VR specifically, but what I can say is with a number of the clients I'm working with, they're struggling on the innovation front because they're trying to deal with the massive disruption in their business. And in some of those cases, that disruption's positive. I mean, not to be, I know a lot of brands are struggling, but it's that sales are up a massive percentage. And Jackson and I talked about this earlier. That's a good thing, but it's also kind of a bad thing because it means people are sort of hoarding product and they're sitting with housefuls of product that they're probably not going to be able to use. So we see a sales decline at a later point in time because people are stocked up. So it's how do you convert, more of the focus right now is less on innovation, but how to convert those sort of panic buyers into long-term customers or customers that can use the current product that they have. So our strategy right now, in a weird way, has been very focused on the very traditional sort of marketing. It's recipes. How do you optimize your cupboard? How do you, use what you have in your shelf? Like, how do you maximize that? So it's not innovation in terms of doing something new. It's innovation in terms of maximizing the stuff that you've got.
Yeah, I think that's genius, actually. When you said that to me, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't think enough people are thinking or talking about, at least in the media, demand versus consumption, right? And that's something everyone needs to be thinking about. It's like, okay, the demand is there now for any category that makes sense right now, but how are people consuming at the same rate? Certain products, sure, of course, right? Toilet paper, sure, makes sense. But other products, not necessarily, right? Especially shelf stable. So I think that's a genius idea, Kevin. I would say to the other point, VR, I came up in digital. I love digital. I think it's so early. I still think it's early adopters. I think it's a coast thing. I think when you're in San Fran, New York, New York's my home. I love New York. Everyone talks about VR, but really when you get out into the rest of the country, it's not a thing. And especially in a recession, I just don't see anyone plunking down all the money to go. I think it's the opposite trend. So I love it. I think there's a lot of opportunities to explore, especially in gaming and such at home. If you have the means, sure. But I think we're ways off there from a CPG standpoint. AR is interesting, especially in aisle, but that's also contradictory to what's happening now in terms of price comparison, supply chain transparency, sourcing, ingredients, and understanding where something came from. I think that is insane potential and will at some point. And even if you have the products at home, I think it does now. But to Kevin's point, I think you nailed it. Like, I don't know if that's where the priorities. And right now, everything's about prioritization, and it's about demand, supply chain, employees, taking care of your employees, being safe and smart. So I think those are the things that everyone's focused on. I do think AR's implication in other areas too. Like, I think furniture. Furniture is struggling right now, by the way, right? Home Depot's doing great, but like the furniture companies are suffering. The mattress companies are suffering, right? So, but I think once that gets back to normal, and it will at some point, whatever that normal is, I could see the AR application. IKEA, I think, has done this really well, where you could see where a couch or something fits in your home, right? I think those things, really applicable, practical ways to help improve the shopping experience, especially virtually, are going to be the biggest impact for AR. And I think those are real. But right now, and for the foreseeable future, let's call it the rest of this calendar year, I just don't see that being a priority for too many brands outside the handful that are really thriving right now.
Jackson,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, something that this kind of points at, and I'll turn it back to Kevin afterward, is what do you see changing through all of this? Like, how will this affect the way that you have your product, deliver your product, develop your products? Like, what do you see changing, and what do you see staying the same or returning back to normal? I'm going to ask both of you guys that.
Yeah, I'll start. I think one of the most interesting things is people are home, and I think the assumption was that television would kind of boom again because people are watching a lot of television, that TV advertising would sort of come back. I would say that is not so much the case. I personally, a lot of the work that we're doing right now is with, I think this is the time for the influencer space to shine. Back to what I was saying before, I think a lot of our messaging is less around brand awareness, because people are stocking up and buying our product regardless of what we were to think. We can't make it fast enough, right? People are buying the product. It's more about the utility. How do you actually use the product that you've already bought so that in the future you'll want to buy more? So we've been working a lot with influencers to do recipes and things, so that like a fruit cup or a fruit bowl that was typically something that was thrown into a lunchbox, more how to use that as a ingredient in a recipe, whether it's making a pineapple upside down cake or something else. How do you utilize that fruit cup in a different way? And we're telling that story through influencers right now. But I do think that, one of the big surprises to me is that even though people are watching more media, this hasn't been a boom for TV advertising, but I do think on the influencer side that there's been a lot more engagement in that front.
Dude, I love pineapple upside down cake. It's one of my favorites. I got to get that recipe.
Check out
from you.
pineapple upside down milkshakes. It's been the big thing.
Oh shit!
We did
that tonight.
And Dole Whip, by the way, that's another big one.
Thank you, dude. Thank you. I'm legit
I,
jealous.
I would chime in here on in my opinion, and I have nothing to prove it, this one is going to be very different than the recession that we saw in 2008, 2009. In the prior recession, there was a significant loss in confidence in the economic system, and tens of millions, maybe not tens of millions, but at least 10 million people lost jobs. And those were more or less permanent losses of jobs. In this case, I don't believe that's the case. Everybody recognizes this was a medical malady, a medical pandemic. And once we're past that, there's no fundamental loss in confidence in the business environment, in their own work situation. A lot of people are going to suffer obvious negative impacts in terms of their purchasing ability and purchasing power. That will have some sustaining impacts for a while. But basically, it's not the government caused this crash, and so we cannot put our faith in government or the economy any longer. This was a total external shock. Once it gets past us, I would suspect that people are bursting at the seams to get out of their house, to get back to the life that they had before, and there'll be a relatively quick snapback. Could be wrong. I hope I'm not.
What are you guys preparing for? Jackson?
You mean in the future state, like in general?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything that's been said. For me, I think the workforce implication is massive. So I'm personally been a big believer of autonomous working way before this. I believe you treat people like adults, they behave like adults. 21, 81, doesn't matter. I've never cared where you work from. I never believed in hours unless you work in Wall Street or in a legal field where you have specific hours. Like a meeting at 9 is not a reason to start your day. So I've always said, hey, we have families, we have lives. It's 2020, it's 2019, we have technology. Work on your terms. It's not even about output, it's about outcome and how you do it and getting shit done and communicating. So for me, in the way I've managed my team has been like work from Met Stadium, work from the beach, work from an apartment, or work from the office. I legit don't care, and I don't care how many hours you put in. And I think what we're seeing now is more of that flexibility, more of that autonomy, and more managers being forced to or welcoming that in their team and trusting their teams. Now, you have to obviously clearly hire the right people. You have to address it when someone takes advantage of it, right? You can't just let that go unnoticed. But I think the shift will clearly be more flexibility. Like, what's that term? AW, I just learned this term actually. Activity-based working, ABW, I think. So like the idea that you're not necessarily next to someone in open space, which was all the rage the last 10 years, but now that you're working from all over the office on your terms in different places, which also helps for social distancing, which I think will definitely be really, really important, especially if you work in a shared working space, right? That they're going to really go through a whole shift. WeWork's already jumped ahead of that to communicate around that. So to me, it's going to be the expectations there. And then most importantly, think about it. There's all these people under 25 that are working now or just coming out of college. This is like the normal. Like they're coming out thinking like, this is okay, I can work from wherever. Like they're not people like us who've been working one way and now we shifted and we can go back. These guys, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of them right now in Southern Cal, my wife's family, this is the new norm. So they're going to come to any new job, Clorox or startup, and expect that they have full flexibility to work from whenever they want, have a laptop right away, and it's going to be a lot more on their terms. And that will be interesting to see which companies are able to embrace that, not this fall, because that'll be easy. Next fall and the fall after, because this is a new norm, in my opinion, that flexibility and trust in the workforce, which also might mean a slowdown in some ways of certain areas like supply chain. So getting accommodating to that, like, hey, things might take a little bit longer, but it could also speed up other things. So what I'm also finding is people tend to actually work more from home, at least in this short time frame, due to maybe boredom or whatnot. So that's my take.
Yeah,
Kevin,
I build on it. So we're talking a lot about the business side of things on people being more accustomed to working from home and how that it changes business. But oh my God, the education side is going to be crazy. So, you're talking about college students right now who are freshmen in college, looking at paying $30,000 a year to do stay-at-home education at University of Michigan or wherever, when they could go to their local community college or University of Phoenix and get the same level of credits for $1,000 for the same semesters. You're going to see I think you're going to see a massive shift in the online education front, both from elementary to high school to college, where people are just deferring that first year or two of college and just doing it online if you're not going to get the college experience from being at the university, you might as well cut out 90% of the costs and do it online. it's going to disrupt the entire education system in the US, I think. And I think that's the piece that's been underreported. If you have kids or kids that are in college right now, they're like, screw this. I'm not paying X amount of money for my freshman year or sophomore year to be deferred and work and take it from home. I'm going to take it from my local community college and get the same credits. It's going to destroy the entire university system of the United States. That's my opinion of the unreported piece that has not really caught that much traction yet.
I heard colleges have already said that there's no need for SAT scores. A couple of my nephews and nieces were telling me that for this upcoming entrance, right? So there's no SATs.
They're just desperate to get.
Because they can't take it.
And people can't take it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got a question here. Well, two questions about the workplace issue and working from anywhere. Let's say that you have that and you like that and everybody else does too, but as a leader, you're thinking and concerned about keeping a culture that helps you. And how do you keep culture when everyone's remote?
So I'll start because I'm passionate. I've hated the culture term, and you unfortunately see this at startups where culture is defined by the perks, free lunch, beer pong, ping pong, outings. That's not culture, right? Culture is the people. At the end of the day, if you hire great people with core foundational values, for me, I always look for three things: empathy, versatility, curiosity. Everything else will come. So if I get the right people and I interview everyone from intern to SVP, that's where the culture is. Absolutely. How you treat each other, how you deal with conflict, how you address someone, how empathetic you are to their situation so you can resolve that conflict but still be direct, not passive aggressive. And then collaboration tools, right? Video, Slack, Teams, whatever it is you're on. And yes, traveling at times, having offsites together at times when we can, I think is still critical and important, no question. But in my opinion, I think culture is really about the people and how you treat each other. And you might have to work a little bit harder to stay engaged and stay connected. But I firmly believe, sometimes I've been in offices, how many of us have been in offices where everyone's there and it is a shit culture? I mean, it's just, we're all there and we're all nice, smart people, but like, it's just a bad culture for whatever the reasons are, right? So like, I don't think culture is dictated or mandated by the office space. I think it's helped. It's a nice thing to have, but it's the people, and it's got to stem from the top, right? It's got to be the leadership setting the tone and their actions and their values, not just me just saying all this stuff. It's then when I get off this thing with you guys, I go to Slack, how am I acting? How am I engaging people? What trust am I giving them? And so forth. I think that's where it comes, and it takes time. So that's my take, at least.
It's somebody who recently started, with a new client during this pandemic. So I started working with Facebook during this. I tell you, one of the challenges that I'm having is some of the things you take for granted in interpersonal communications doesn't necessarily translate on Zoom. So, getting an idea of the hierarchy, who is the approver, who is, just that chain of command. It's really I think people are very excited about remote working with companies they've been with for a long time. They understand kind of the lay of the land and what who's in charge of what. Starting somewhere new in that environment is, my experience, is really extraordinarily difficult. And it's just, maybe that's a good thing. In some ways it breaks down the hierarchy, but in some ways it's really tough because it's just really hard to tell who's in charge, who's the decision maker, who is the final sort of voice in the room. Those things that are sort of, I think, taken for granted through visual cues and the way things are set up and age and other things, it removes those, and it makes it, as somebody starting new with a new company or a new client, very hard to understand like what that hierarchy is.
Whitney pronounces racy matrices for everyone.
Yeah.
Joe, you want to take a quick crack at that culture question, or should we move on?
I think we can move on.
Okay. What do we think about third-party resellers and price gouging? I can't imagine that's popular on here, but what do you do about that? How do you handle folks doing that? We've got several folks in the consumer packaged goods space on here who are probably either just beginning to deal with that or have dealt with that before.
I mean, I know we've taken a hard stance on as a company at Clorox to managing that. I'm not on the inside of exactly the day to day, but I know our partners on the retail side have as well. I'm pretty sure Amazon's been very aggressive with that. I think they've really done a good job of that. And I've seen very little of it. Obviously, we were one of the biggest victims to that, or the consumers were the victims to that with our products. And I think Amazon did a really wonderful job managing that. And I know our team and our leadership have been made that very serious to make sure everyone can get the products when they can at the right price. I think it sucks. It's horrible. I mean, you're hearing all these stories, not only price gouging, but just hoarding in general. And, I just think it's unfortunately a byproduct of any time, this kind of Mad Max, post-apocalyptic kind of feeling happens. You're going to get the bad players. But I've been also pleasantly surprised by how many good players are out there, from corporate to individual entities that have done a really, really good job of doing the right thing and calling people out, and sharing and from the layoff list to sharing open source layoff list to like sharing where you can get toilet paper. I see it all the time in the early days of this on Facebook, people saying, go get toilet paper, not like, I'm not going to tell anyone so I can get 10 packs of it. So I think it's disgusting, but it feels like it's starting to get a little bit better, but maybe also people are buying less and the hoarding is becoming less. It's not clear to me.
Yeah, they're probably wondering what they're going to do with all that toilet paper.
Well,
Yeah. Well, that goes back to what I was saying.
But it's going to be a long time before the once the replenishment is occurring at a regular basis. I mean, it's going to involve real disruption at the paper mills, needless to say, because everybody's going to have a 6-month, 8-month supply on hand, and once they're confident that anytime they go to the store, it'll be there, they'll start working down their inventory rather than continuing to replenish.
Yeah. And I think that's what happened to us. I mean, I guess the question is, we didn't really perceive that the product would be a hoarding product. We didn't expect people buying frozen strawberries en masse or fruit bowls en masse because it was shelf stable. That was a back to school product, or that was a smoothie product. It wasn't a product that we really had in mind as like a disaster prepping product. So I think that, to the question, we haven't had the situation that I think maybe Clorox has had with kind of like the black market selling above cost. But there is a concern about all these people that have bought a ton of product, and it was what I was saying before, providing utility to teach them how to use the product that they bought, so that in the future they'll have a positive association with the product and they'll want to buy it in the future.
There's only one good aspect about being my age and having a memory that goes back to the days of the Nixon administration. Back in 1974, President Nixon imposed wage and price controls. Of all people to do it, he was the last that should have, because he worked in the Office of Price Administration during World War II. But he finally got talked into doing it. And immediately it led to product shortages. At the same time, we had an oil embargo, and we wound up with gasoline lines, and everybody thought that the gasoline lines were caused by the Arab oil embargo, when in reality they were caused by the domestic price controls that have been imposed, because obviously the Arab oil embargo didn't cause the toilet paper shortage, and that was a rampant problem in 1974 and 1975 in retail stores. So memories are not very long in regard to those kinds of things, but what I was getting around to is I've been through this once before. It was not caused by a pandemic, it was caused by government incompetence, and I was able to anticipate that certain SKUs would wind up being in very short supply, and we lucked out in that regard, but not everybody else did.
Yeah, price controls. There are a bunch of countries out there that are probably thinking about using those right now, that have used them before. Speaking of which, what's the international angle looking like for you, Jackson? Do you focus mostly on the US, or are you also internationally focused?
Yeah, I mean, clearly Clorox is. My focus right now, my group on D2C is North America, primarily like 99%. But global is important, and it's in my purview over the next year to 2 years to figure out. Obviously, D2C is going to be very relevant there, but right now I'm focused on North America.
In that 2 to 3 year kind of window, like, what's your thinking? What are your early impressions about what that is going to look like for you guys?
Well, yeah, what we sell will be regionally and culturally specific, right? Especially in wellness, certain ingredients, certain items are going to do well, like beauty in certain areas, will look different than beauty in other areas. And same thing with functional foods and beverages to go and so forth. So I'm excited to dig into that. I don't know if we have a POV, but definitely Central and Western Europe will be very different than what Asia looks like. But in terms of the opportunity, massive, right? I mean, direct to consumer, it's already there in different ways and forms. I think Shopify is a good testament to that. Obviously, Alibaba is a good testament to the e-commerce scale, and Asia in general. E-com has been well ahead of US for a long time. So, especially with social buying and such. But so I think there's so much we have to uncover. My expertise has been mainly in North America, so I'm also excited to partner with the right folks as we start to build that out and think about that as a broader organization, what that looks like, because there's a lot of great knowledge there from global entities, global companies that are doing things that, while very similar in some ways, very different and distinct to that country or that nation.
You should hang out with us, Jackson. We got all those folks. That's our
All right.
specialty.
Well,
Yeah.
cool. We'll be talking. I'm glad I'm in the Slack then.
Yeah, definitely. We're here to help. So,
and Joanne, the only thing I'd add is that I would say globally, the migration of grocery to e-commerce is something that's happening globally right now. We're seeing that occur across many, many markets. I know that, in certain markets, it's highly localized. Like in India, people are still buying from their local grocer, like the corner store. But we are seeing consistently a massive product increase of sales online, depending on what the channel it is, universally right now.
My view on global, the biggest impact that's going to occur relative to North America is an immediate effort to reshore critical national security components, national security supplies, particularly in the area of medical equipment and pharmaceuticals. That'll be first, but it won't end there. I'm pretty confident that there's going to be a huge wave of reshoring of manufacturing to the point where 10 years from now, you might not even be able to buy a toaster with a made in China label on it. If memories remain about what the way people feel about China right now, and having sort of their government being responsible for so much of the chaos that we're in right now. So I think we're going to see a huge amount of change in terms of our global trade balance. I certainly hope so. I've been very vocal over the years. You can browse the postings I make on LinkedIn that go back many years on being hypercritical of the U.S. trade posture, particularly with China. We can't afford to run an $800 billion a year trade deficit in goods. We just run out of money. Eventually, we'll sell off all our assets, and we won't have any way to balance our current accounts. So something has to give, and it has to give soon. And I suspect this is the triggering mechanism. This is the triggering event that's going to cause a huge change.
That seems to be in the air on all of our other discussions, especially those involving China and government affairs. I don't really think that China really appreciates the kind of mess they're in right now. Hopefully they do. Kevin, going back 1 second to what you were saying about, or what we were discussing around like culturally specific products and stuff like that. And we're just going over just a little bit over time, but I wanted to touch on that with you. How do you think the folks at Dole approach that? How would you approach that? That's an interesting thing because pineapple is such a culturally specific food.
Yeah, I mean, it's tied to the supply. I mean, I think the thing that's interesting to them, it's tied to the supply chain, right? So you're only going to promote the products, you're going to sell the products that you actually have that actually grew this year, right? And that's one of the things that I think Joseph probably more familiar with everybody. Your supply chain is directly tied to your growth, and when I say growth, it's actually physical growth. I guess the thing that gets lost sometimes is that there's some shortages on product just because the inventory the inventory is not available in some cases, and you're going to prioritize certain markets over others depending on which ones you can make the most money off of. So for a company like Dole, you're going to market the products that you have the highest yield in the countries that are most likely to buy the most of them.
Excellent market prioritization advice. Well, guys, we're just a little bit over time, and this was so much fun. Kevin, any parting words?
No, I think we're good.
Jackson, Joe?
No, thank you for having me. It's a
Yeah,
blast.
Awesome.
thank you very much. It was great meeting with all of you and discussing
Likewise.
ideas.
Yeah, we're
Same
getting
here.
a lot. We're getting a lot of people saying thank you, that they really enjoyed this. And folks, as always, if you need help making sense of all this stuff and working out solutions, NMS is there for you. They've been wonderful to us too. And get your Clorox and your your Dole.
And for
I'll
those
see what I can do
and for
about
those of
getting-
you that are not in Los Angeles, it is 90 degrees and sunny out. So I'm sure it's like that everywhere right now.
It's 66 in Baltimore. I'll see what I can do. Slide deck posted to the NMS website, so if anybody wants to see these slides and have a copy of them, they'll be available. Hopefully.
I'm a Terps grad, so go Baltimore.
Oh, great. I went to, yeah.
All right, folks.
Take
We'll
it easy,
see you
guys.
next week. We've got some amazing folks in the queue for subsequent weeks. Stay tuned. Ciao.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.